You're listening to PumaPodcast.
Hi, I'm Marco Azurin, PumaPodcast for Teka Teka. Mental health is a universal human right. This is the theme for this year's World Mental Health Day. With most adults spending a third of their day at work, company leaders and managers are responsible for defining a work culture that protects employee well-being. In the podcast, The Imaginable Workplace, Haraya Coaching Culture Practice Lead Jen Horn and PumaPodcast CEO Carl Javier explore broader issues about work, helping organizations willing to transform their systems. This World Mental Health Day, we'll share a snippet of their conversation with psychotherapist Patrick Gamo and human resource business partner for Zuellig Pharma, Jen Garcia.
Hi, my name is Charles Patrick S. Gamo, but you can just call me Patrick or Pat. As a psychotherapist, what I do is I provide clinical interventions to clients. I normally work with people presenting with mental health struggles and issues, both diagnosable and non-diagnosed. So things like vocational discontent, or occupational stress, or major depressive disorder, or generalized anxiety disorder, or any manner of anxiety disorders. If we were to describe what mentally unwellness looks like, it's when a person is easily overwhelmed or is overtaken by all sorts of uncomfortable or intrusive thoughts and feelings. When a person who is mentally well would normally be able to parse that or compartmentalize that, not neglect it or not ignore it, but just put it in its place whilst at work. A person who is mentally unwell will allow that to kind of like seep in, and it gets in the way of them being able to interact with other people, gets in the way of how productive they can get.
As Pat said, diagnosed and undiagnosed, many Filipinos can still be faced with mental health challenges, diba? And in another report in 2021 by mental health company Mind Nation, they found that 53%, so more than half of 6,000 Filipino workers surveyed, had experienced mental health challenges during the pandemic. And nearly 25% of them considered quitting their jobs because of those struggles, right? Those challenges included weakened focus, difficulty sleeping, low levels of confidence, and less pleasure in the things that they normally actually enjoy. And all of these contribute to reducing their productivity at work.
I think it's no coincidence that we have all of this and we have the great resignation. The thing though is, this also provides us now with a real data-driven approach.
Yeah. And with those stats, parang it becomes really harder to ignore, and it becomes something that leaders will have to deal with talaga.
Have you noticed, like Jen, before, it was so normal in workplaces for people to say, ay, nadidepress ako eh. And it was a non-clinical sort of just word thrown around. But now, people are much more careful in their language use.
Yeah. And it's more of, okay, how do we actually want to talk about this? And how does it impact the quality of our lives, the quality of our work? And then also, in the Philippines, it's less commonplace then for us to talk about mental health and therapy. And I guess in the workplace, lalong scary or intimidating to open up that conversation because it feels like there's so many vulnerabilities that come with doing so. And, maybe you're risking your credibility, or parang how your office mates or how your boss perceive you as a reliable workmate, diba? So what can we do about it? Well, to get to the point nga where we can have effective mental health support at work, the first step is to remove the stigma. This next voice that you'll hear is from someone we brought in to speak from his experience as an HR practitioner. We didn't realize that interviewing him would actually reveal his own story of struggling with mental health for decades before finally opening up about it at work.
My official name is Raul Arnel Garcia, but everybody knows me as Jen Garcia. In Zuellig Pharma, I am the vice president and human resource business partner for the distribution business unit. I've been an HR professional for the last 35 years. I am a person who suffers from a mental illness, and I'm very open about that. My openness about my own personal concerns only started probably a few years back, right? Maybe 4 years at most, when I start talking about it, when I start disclosing it to certain people. And even when I did that, it's really to some very close friends in the office whom I felt could help and assist me.
So when we asked Jen about his thoughts on mental health at work, he actually made us question yung dividing ng mental health at work, mental health at home, and mental health in other social settings. Like, why are we even putting barriers between these?
I don't think you can compartmentalize mental health that way. I think mental health is the state of a person's well being, regardless of where he is. Now, why is it important to talk about it in the context of work? The state of a person's well being can be affected by what's happening at work. That is a big factor. After all, we spend more than a third of our day and sometimes more than half of our day interacting, working in the offices or wherever it is we do our work. At the same time, our mental health outside of work also affects the quality of work that we do when we're in the offices, when we're at work. So it is a factor that could affect our mental health, but our mental health can also affect our work. And that's very important to distinguish.
About 2.5 years ago, Zuellig's CEO posted a LinkedIn article about mental health and how open other companies are, or how open we should be about including people with mental health issues.
And when I saw that being posted very openly and a CEO of the company advocating it kind of opened my eyes and gave me a sense of security to start talking more about it.
This eventually led to the development of one of Zuellig's strongest HR programs for diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI.
We have a very senior level core group who are pillars of the DEI programs. I am the pillar for mental health and well-being. When this program was launched 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, I talked about it over a web meeting. A lot of people in the organization, in all of our markets, were listening in. And I talked about it. And I said I was championing this pillar because I myself had a personal reason to do so. And coming out that way, it was scary. It was a very difficult decision to make. I thought about it maybe not just 10 times, more times, if I'm going to come out with it and tell everybody in the organization about it. And I did. But yes, surprisingly, after that, I got messages from people around the organization thanking me for coming out and themselves saying that, yes, I also suffer from it, or my relative suffers from it, or a significant other suffers from it. And as a consequence, I'm also learning to cope. You always know as a statistic that 1 in 4 is probably suffering from some form of mental ill health, but you never really know until you kind of open yourself up that way and you have people reaching out to you and realizing the extent to which it affects the organization or other people.
Madalas naman nasasabi ngayon yung you don't know what a person is going through. And you don't know what's going on inside. And we need to champion being vulnerable, talking about it. And if we as leaders are willing to open up, then our teams will not be ashamed to speak.
When we have our unconscious biases about people who suffer from mental health and how probably they'll be less productive or less efficient at work, we're really excluding a certain member of our society where we can get a lot of talent from.
So, what are your thoughts on what Jen shared so far, Carl?
So far, the top thing is the CEO being the person initiating the conversation.
Sobrang important din yung culture building as part of opening up these issues and just generally giving more importance to mental health.
What can they do? They can provide an open, safe, and supportive environment so that the person can discuss very openly and very freely what is bothering them and what is stressing them out or what is contributing to their mental illness. And then providing and allowing that person to seek that help from professionals who can absolutely give them solutions to their issues. I think that's what should be clear in the minds of managers. But even in my email, I write people and I say, how are you doing? And in my next sentence, I really want to know, how are you doing? And you would be surprised at how much people start opening up. It's just asking twice and making sure that I'm truly interested. I'm truly listening. I'm not just passing you by and asking you, how are you? How are you? I want to spark a conversation. And I think that's one way of being human as a leader, diba? Even in our emails are so impersonal. And we start our emails with, hey, Carl, how are you? And then you go straight to the work, right? Why don't you just begin with, hey, Carl, how are you? I'm really interested. So I heard you attended a leadership seminar last week. How did that go? Share your insights and let's keep the conversation going about this project. And you'll see that, it just opens you up and you become more human and you're more willing to talk about something and you're really interested. It's almost basic, right? It's almost like I don't need to teach that. But at work, it's a theme that I think we need to remind people about.
When we do create the space to truly listen, what are some of the challenges that people talk about at work? Let's listen to Pat again.
Others will have interpersonal conflicts at their places of work, and that's normal. But the most common, if ever, is balance. They're all struggling with balance. It's either that or vocational discontent is the simplest way I can put it. Parang they're in the jobs that they're in, but they don't actually like what they're doing. But they felt trapped or felt forced to do it because of different circumstances. So if it's not an interpersonal concern, it's discontent with their life situation or with their work situation because of either lack of growth or it's not aligned with their values, or it's that they lack balance. They're overly stressed or they've overinvested themselves in work and it's everything else has fallen by the wayside.
Diba, Jen, we joke about the yoga sessions and the meditation apps and all of this like wellness initiative, mga nagsisindi ng kandila sa opisina, ganyan. But, these aren't as effective as one might think. And we've had this conversation before, like in our episode with Vina of Taskas, where we need to go to the source of the stress, not just managing the stress.
Yeah. Sobra, Carl. So let's listen to Jen Garcia sharing more of the questions that he asks himself in his work in HR with Zuellig about, how might we design less stressful and more meaningful experiences for people in the workplace?
We already know what it is at work that stresses people and could affect their mental health. And really, that's the job. How we design the job. How meaningful is the job? How much feedback does the job provide so that the individual can take ownership for the results of the job? The task variety. Do I have enough variety in the work so that I can use and maximize all of the skill sets that are available to me, right? The effectiveness of the organization. Am I getting the right support from my managers? Are my peers providing the right support? Those are the things that really impact mental health. Is the workload correctly distributed? Am I overworked? Do I have the right tools so that I can cope with the work? That's the work that HR professionals should be doing. That's the work that managers should be doing. I'm not saying it's not important to have all of the other interventions. It's also important. But if we spend majority of our time looking at the job, looking at organizations, we'll spend less time in putting in interventions and cures afterwards, right?
So it's great that Jen Garcia classifies 3 levels of intervention. He actually gives us like a framework that we can use for providing mental health support at work. The first level of intervention looks at designing more humane jobs and organizations.
Look at the jobs, look at the organization, design it in the way that it is more human, design it in a way so that people find meaning and purpose in their work, are able to have meaningful relationships with the people around their work, right? That's the first intervention.
The second level looks at providing team members with some foundational tools and knowledge to help themselves manage their own stress and mental health. Here are some questions that Jen suggests we should ask ourselves and our team.
How do I manage my own stresses? How do I balance my work and my family? How do I balance relationships outside of work? And at least to point them to the right resources so that they can themselves develop and get the right ideas to help them cope.
Once you have those two levels as a foundation, then you can think about the third level, which are the more visible or performative interventions, the things that can help alleviate other stresses.
The last intervention is where you put in programs in place. There's nothing wrong with mindfulness sessions. There's nothing wrong with guided exercises because it really does help to ease stress. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with expanding your HMO coverage to cover mental health. There's nothing wrong with expanding your leaves coverage to have not just sick leaves, but mental illness sick leaves as well. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think that's the third level of intervention. If we can focus on the first, it'll be great, right? If we can cover the whole gamut, that's even better. I think central to this whole thing are people managers. Leaders define culture, really. It's almost as if their own assumptions, their own beliefs as leaders define organizations. So if we're talking and we're having conversations about mental health in the organization, it's very important that leaders mirror that and are examples of those conversations. And it can start as simple as asking people how they are really, and to be sensitive enough to sit somebody down and spend some time to talk about it. That's the informal way, and to me, the best way of building culture.
Thanks for listening to Teka Teka. Again, I'm Marco Azurin, PumaPodcast. Today's episode was produced by myself and put together by Freddy Blanco. Be sure to catch the full conversation on mental health in the workplace by searching The Imaginable Workplace on your favorite podcast app. The Imaginable Workplace is brought to you by Haraya Coaching, a company that supports individuals and teams by creating safe spaces for transformation, in partnership with PumaPodcast. The episode where we got the snippet was produced by Macy Hoven and edited by Mark Casillan. Maraming salamat po.